Shalom and welcome to Biblical Faith with Sam Peak. We invite you to join us as Sam brings a study in the Torah from the Jewish sages. And now our speaker, Sam Peak.
Shalom Aleichem. Peace upon you. Welcome to our program, Biblical Faith. Brukim Habayim in Hebrew. Welcome to the program. Stay with us. We're going to study a little while. We're still studying about the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph, Beit. And we're still on the second letter, the Beit letter. Let's walk to the board for just a minute and look at it and get an idea of it. Again, let me take some of this off. This is the letter Beit, what the letter Beit looks like, okay? Its gematria, its numerical value is 2. Is 2. And because of that, it's very, very good that God uses this letter to create the universe, because the universe is in the duality. Look, there's a duality to it. If we go to the sages of Israel, in fact, there's only one thing in the entire universe that actually is absolute oneness, and that is God Himself. He is absolute oneness. And the sages of Israel tell us all that was created for man's use came in pairs. Think about it a minute. It comes in pairs. When we come to the Torah, and we're going to talk about this a little more in detail, we have the written Torah and the oral Torah. When we come to the commandments, the mitzvot, we have positive commandments, these things you shall do, and we have negative commandments, these things you shall not do. They are in pairs. They talk about, their word is the intermediaries. What are the intermediaries? In Jewish thinking, the intermediaries are Moses and Aaron. Moses, who brings to us the Torah, and Aharon, Aaron, who represents Israel as the high priest. Okay? The world itself, heaven and earth, this world and the world to come, they also are a pair. Heaven and earth in the sense of not just the physical universe and what we think of as the physical heavens, but the spiritual heaven, the spiritual universe and the physical universe. They're in pairs. The luminaries, it says, which is the sun and the moon, they are in a pair. Man, male and female, in a pair. Okay? So they name all of these pairs, all of these doubles, and relate it back to the letter Beit, in which God begins the creation, which is a dual creation in duality. Okay? All right. Now, let's go back to the board. We have to expand upon a little bit this concept of the written Torah, and we have talked about this many times in these classes. The written Torah, and which by the way in Hebrew is called the Torah she Biktav. Okay? And then the oral Torah. Now, I know many people have lots of problems with the oral Torah who aren't the Jewish people, but we've explained this many times, but we'll talk about it some more, okay? The oral Torah is called the Torah she, well, that's an awful big apostrophe, isn't it? The Torah she Be'al, pei, in the mouth. The Torah that is in the mouth, that is on the tongue, that is passed from teacher to student, generation to generation. Anyway, the oral Torah, by the way, let me read a comment by Rabbi Monk. I think it's an oversimplification, but it helps us in the short run to have a little better, in just this one program, a little better understanding of the oral Torah. He says the oral Torah, the Torah Shebe'al Pei, is like a detailed commentary to the written Torah, the Torah Shebiktav, which reveals the innermost meaning that is hidden in the written text. Actually, that's not Rabbi Monk who says that. That's another rabbi named Rabbi Bachya. Okay? So the entire Torah is given to man in two parts: the written Torah, the Torah Shebiktav, and the oral Torah, which God transmitted to Moses orally and which was passed from teacher to student, generation after generation. Every commentary, every commentator, every rabbinical authority that you're going to find in Judaism, all of them are going to agree that the written Torah and the oral Torah are indivisible. They're indivisible halves of one whole. In other words, you shouldn't take one without the other. Put it that way. Okay? All right. Rabbi Hirsch, excuse me. We're going back to some of his things. Now, I want to read Rabbi Hirsch's comments because Rabbi Hirsch he could be so succinct and so clear and so good on so many things. Listen to what he says about explaining the written and the oral Torah. He says, the written law or the written Torah is comparable to court testimony, which can be recorded accurately in writing, but will not reproduce fully the spirit in which it was said. Do you get that? This is his explanation of explaining to us things about the written word and the oral word. Okay? Listen to it again. The written word, the written law is comparable to court testimony, which can be recorded very accurately in writing. However, if we come later and read this, just because we read the writing doesn't necessarily mean that we will reconnect with the spirit in which it was said. The oral Torah is going to reproduce for us the spirit in which those original words were said. I can understand that because when we come later and if we're just reading the writing, we don't necessarily get when a voice was raised or when an emphasis was put or all the little fine, especially if we're reading a translation removed from the original and we don't know all the ins and outs about the original in the original language, and we don't catch all of the little fine points, and we certainly do not catch the spirit, okay? Thus, it says, Rabbi Hirsch says, the oral Torah captures that which cannot be put into writing. It conveys reflections of basic human attitudes and emotions, matters which cannot fully be transmitted in the fixed form of the written script. For example, the spirit that prevailed in the lives of our forefathers. I understand exactly what he's saying. And yet, a big part of the oral Torah, a big part of the oral tradition, is based upon the written text and what we find out, what we can determine from the letters themselves. What we can and that's why we are studying this, by the way. That's one of the reasons that we are studying the Aleph Beit, because it is going to give us certain things in the written text that the oral tradition comes and looks and finds this as a hint to us of something larger that's going on. And if we don't know these things and if we don't have a guidebook for them, then we miss them completely. That's what we're doing. Rabbi Hirsch goes on to say that the written Torah is to the oral Torah as notes on a lecture are to the original lecture. Do you see what he's saying? What he's saying, this is interesting. His idea, is that when Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our rabbi, our teacher, our master, when he is on Mount Sinai, all of those different times that he was on, for all of the long period of time that he was there, what is going on there? Is he just hanging out and sitting in the presence of God and getting this glow on his face? No. He is listening to the lecture. God is teaching Moses the Torah. God is giving to Moses the essence of the oral tradition, of the oral Torah. And what is Moses doing? Moses is writing notes, and the notes are the written Torah. Now that's that we bring back. Those are the notes that remind us that that's what you do when you take notes. You're writing down short things that will remind you of the lecture that was said to you. Okay. For instance, the written Torah reminds us to refrain from work on the Shabbat. It says don't work on the Shabbat. What's work? That question has to come. Well, the oral Torah comes to tell us for what is work for a Jew. What is work for them? What is it that God doesn't want the Jewish people to do on the Shabbat? Okay, but without that definition, we don't have a clue. We don't have a clue what would fall into the parameters of that. Okay, all right. The written Torah remarks to us in one place in Deuteronomy, actually in Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse 21, it says, "You shall slaughter an animal as I have commanded you." Now this is the basis of kosher slaughter. This is also the basis of how an animal was to be slaughtered in the temple, in the tabernacle. And it's a very detailed procedure. How do we know? And as I have commanded you. Nowhere, if we look in the entire text of the written Torah, nowhere do we find God sitting down and saying, okay, this is step one in the slaughter of an animal, this is step two, this is step three. The only place that information, and yet he says, as I have commanded you. Now, why am I harping on that? Because one of the problems that I run into a whole lot in trying to share the study of Judaism with Christians in order that they can know more about Jews and know more about Judaism, and I hope know more about the New Testament. One of the problems I always run into is they have been, I think, erroneously taught that, that Jesus came, Yeshua came to do away with that Jewish tradition. He came, and it's based on misunderstandings, I think, in the Gospels. But those misunderstandings come because we don't have a knowledge of Judaism. But anyway, that he came to do away with all of that, and that the oral Torah is extra, that it's added, it's something the rabbis added, all of those things. No, it truly is not. It really is not. It's the other part of the pair. We're looking at Beit, remember, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Beit, which is the number 2, and we're looking at how in creation things come in pairs. And this is a pair, a matched pair, the written Torah and the oral Torah. And together they make one really indivisible, I think, whole. Okay, here we see it. This is just one example. How in the world could a Jew know how to slaughter as God had commanded him unless that information was somewhere else? That information was in the oral Torah. It has to refer to that. Okay. Now we're looking at Rabbi Bachya again. What he says about this, he says the importance of both the written and the oral Torah and their interrelationship are explained by the two great luminaries, the sun which illuminates the earth by day, in other words, the sun and the moon. The sun which illuminates the earth by day alludes to the written Torah. The moon which gives light at night alludes to the oral Torah. Added to them, they're not the only luminaries, by the way. They're the pair, but they're not the only ones. Added to them are the stars, which allude to the Talmudic commentaries, and the Aggadot that elaborate on the oral text. I think it's interesting what he says. What he is saying, he is finding a parallel between this relationship and nature, which this goes back once again to the Beit, okay? All right. Now, let's go somewhere else, and let's go back to the board, okay? Let's see. We want to talk about the two tablets. The two tablets. The two tablets of the 10 Commandments, okay? That's what we're going to talk about. We're not going to, unless I catch myself, maybe we will. But you remember back, quite some time ago, we talked about the tablets of blue, the sapphire tablets, and I would like to reteach those lessons, but we can't. We want to look at something else, and so we're going to use a simpler illustration, but how the tablets were actually crystal, made of sapphire, of a perfect sapphire crystal, and a perfect crystal has, in this case sapphire, has 6 sides, and they are joined together, where they really actually they are 2 tablets, but they become one. They're joined together. Well, that gives us 10 sides all the way around if these 2 crystals are joined. And how when God wrote the letters, or the commandments, those went all the way through that crystal, and they came out on the opposing side in another commandment. Well, there is a pairing of the commandments. So I mentioned that to go here, okay? Let's look at it this way. Okay. Shtei lukot Haidut. That's the Shtelukot, the two tablets of the testimony, if you will, Haidut of the testimony. One tablet, and we're going to use rectangles this time, okay? So one tablet. We need to remember we're doing these things in Hebrew, so we need to go right to left. So one tablet contained man's responsibilities to God. Okay? Man's responsibilities to God. The other tablet contained man's responsibilities to the creation, to man, if you will. Man's responsibilities to man. What they're going to say is these two tablets are actually one. In fact, let me read Rabbi Monk's words on this. He says, one tablet contained the 5 commandments governing man's duties toward God. The second tablet contained 5 interhuman obligations. The word shnei, which it means two in Hebrew, indicates that the tablets were absolutely equal to one another. Now, isn't that something? They're equal. We say, let's go on, because I'll mess it up if I try to add to his words. They were of the same size and weight. Spiritually, they correspond to each other and they are of equal importance. In other words, these commandments here that are going to be about our relationship with God are the same importance, of equal weight, as these commandments here that have to do with our relationship between human beings. Now, see, some people don't think in those terms. And that's not good. We need to think in those terms. You mean to tell me the way I treat, the way I speak, the way I talk to my fellow man, the way I think about my fellow man, the things that I do or don't do to my fellow man are just as important as the way I relate to God? Yes. That's the importance of this. They are of equal weight. And since the tablets are two that really are joined and really are one, you can't do one without the other. You may think you have a great relationship with God and have a terrible relationship with your fellow men. You may think that your relationship with God is great, but it's not. That's the whole point of this, the whole point. Or you may have great relationships with mankind, with men, and you never give God a second thought. That's also a problem. Also. Okay, let's go back here just a minute. Okay, wow. Well, let me just show this to you. Because what are we doing? We're studying the Aleph Beit, and here already is a clue to us that even though these are two tablets, they are to be considered as one. If we look at it, let me write it in Hebrew. Shnei Lukot. But this is written, we'll just put this part up. Shnei Lukot. 2 tablets, okay? 2 tablets. But this word is written, Lukot. The word Lukot is for tablets, okay? Is written in Hebrew deficiently. You see, it really should be written, it's actually written with these vowel signs under it, which means it's Luchot, okay? It really should be written with a vav. In fact, 2 vavs in it. One vav here, which would be this same vowel sign, lu, and another vav here, which would be the o vowel sign. So really it should be written like this. Lu. Luchot. You see there are 2 vavs missing, and it's written deficiently. Now what the rabbis come to this and they say, wow, now why in the world is this word luchot written deficiently? Why is that happening? Why doesn't the Torah, and the Torah is perfect, why doesn't it spell it out? So if it's written deficiently, that means they come to draw a lesson from that. That is, they say it this way, that the halves constitute a whole only in combination. In other words, only in the right combination is implied by the Torah's defective spelling of luchot without the vav, as if it were meant to be pronounced luchat. We can pronounce it luchat this way, which means 1 tablet. See, this way, if it was written out all the way, we couldn't pronounce it that way. But it can be, and the Torah has no vowel signs in it, so it could be pronounced luchat just as well as luchot. That's a very subtle lesson that we get of how the importance of the Aleph Beit is, of just how important it is in our study. Okay, all right. As the tablets form one single physical unit when they were placed together, so both together constitute one divine law. In other words, you can't have one side without the other. This implies the dual nature of the Torah. Rabbi Hirsch comes to tell us this implies the dual nature of the Torah, in which duties toward God and those toward man are inseparable. The discharge of only one kind of obligation without the other is not considered a fulfillment of Judaism. Very, very true. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about a very interesting concept. And I don't know why I came back over here, because I'm going to have to go turn right back around and go back. I don't know why I did that. Okay. We started talking about how one side of the tablets have to do with our responsibilities toward God, and the other side towards man. Okay. So here we have commandments 1, and I'm not going to write them out, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And here we have commandments 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, if we're talking about how they were written on crystal sapphire, and these crystal sapphires were joined, okay, that means when God wrote on one side, I am Hashem your God, see, it would come out, the letters would go all the way through, but they would come out on the other side of that crystal, you shall not kill. That's the 6th commandment. So in other words, there is a parallel, a relationship between this 1st commandment and the 6th commandment, between the 2nd and the 7th, between the 3rd and the 8th, between the 4th and the 9th, and between the 5th and the 10th. Now, let's see what the rabbis have to say about that. Now we'll walk back to the table and we'll just go through. Once we have this idea in our heads that there's a parallel between 1 and 6, 2 and 7, 3 and 8, and so on, then we can do better. Okay? All right. In the Midrashim, they begin to seek a relationship. They try to find out why exactly. Why is there a parallel? How can there be a parallel between commandment number 1 and commandment number 6? Commandment number 1 is, I am Hashem your God. In other words, you have no other gods, all of this, but it starts out, Anoki Hashem, I am Hashem your God. What is the 6th commandment? You shall not murder. Now listen to what the Midrash says. It says, for anyone who murders a human being takes away, as it were, from the image of the king. Why? It is because it's written. Look, in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6, it says, whoever sheds the blood of man, talking about murder, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man. This is the reason it's important. Man is made in the image of God. Someone who comes and destroys that image has directly confronted, has taken away from the fact that Anoki Hashem, I am Hashem your God. Do you see the parallel that's going on there? Let me read a little bit more. The Midrash tells a parable. It's told of a king who entered a state, and he erected statues of himself, and he minted coins. After a while, when the populace decided that they wanted to revolt against him, what did they do? They destroyed his statues, and they took and they defaced his image on the coins, thus desecrating the king's image. In the same way, one who murders his fellow man revolts against the king, revolts against God, desecrates the image of God in which he made man. Now, that's something, actually. That's really something to get a hold of and to understand. It will make a difference in the way you think. And the reason I say it is because we're not just talking about here, we have to also understand we're not just talking about physical murder. You know, there is a thing as spiritual murder also. We can murder someone's spirit, I think. In fact, it's much easier to do than to actually physically murder someone. So we need to be careful of those things also. Not to kill someone in their spirit as well as kill them in their body, but certainly not to kill or damage their spirit and who they are inside. That is actually, according to this thinking, according to this midrash, that is actually a revolt not against them, but a revolt against the king. So in other words, we have to be careful what we think. We have to be careful what comes out of our mouth, as well as the actions of our hands. This certainly is the lesson of Judaism. This is the lesson I hope we're beginning to get out of the study of the Aleph Beit, as well as beginning to see the intense importance of the relationship between the Aleph Beit, the Hebrew alphabet, as a revelation of God Himself. The more and the more we learn about the Hebrew alphabet, the more we're going to learn about God Himself. The more we're going to learn about the Torah. The more, as a Christian, because the New Testament in the book of John makes this claim very clear, it is presenting Yeshua as a living Torah, so we can carry it to there and learn more and more about Him. It's going to give us more and more information. All of it a revelation of God. All of it because our Father in heaven, He is our Father in heaven, and He wants you and me and everyone to know Him. He wants us to have a relationship with Him. He wants us to walk with Him and to grow up with Him and to be with Him and to know about Him and have Him in our life. It will make such a difference for you to do those things, to know more and more about Him and to walk with Him in your life. Such a difference. What can we say? Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the lessons. I hope you're enjoying the study. We're going to be here for a while. We have a big alphabet. We have 22 letters, and I'm only on letter number 2. Sorry about that, but I honestly can't rush this study, so we'll just have a good time as we go along and look at the letters one at a time. I want to say to you, Shalom Uvracha, peace and a blessing.
Thank you for joining us in our study. If you enjoyed this study and are interested in learning more from the Torah and the sages of Israel, then check us out on the internet at www.bfm101.com, or you may contact us toll-free at 1-800-639-0169. Our mailing address is Biblical Faith, P.O. Box 2, Abilene, Texas 79604. Until next time, we wish you Shalom Uvracha, peace and a blessing.